Thank you for joining me again on this Friday for our devotional time, again drawn from the book of Acts, written by the Christian author by the name of Luke, a compatriot of Paul the Apostle and Barnabas. And the insightful passage that we're going to look at today is taken from Acts chapter 17, verses 16 through 34. Somewhat of a lengthy read, but nevertheless gives us great insight as to how Paul, functioning outside of his normal Jewish environment as a devoted Pharisee and his upbringing and training, to speak to those who are part of the Gentile culture predominantly. And I hope you'll find the time we spend together today very helpful, insightful. It was for me. Let's begin reading then at verse 16 of chapter 17. When Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he was greatly distressed to see that the city was full of idols. So he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and the God-fearing Greeks, as well as in the marketplace day by day with those who happened to be there. A group of Epicurean and Stoic philosophers began to dispute with him. Some of them asked, "What is this babbler trying to say?" Others remarked, "He seems to be advocating foreign gods." They said this because Paul was preaching the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. Then they took him and brought him to a meeting at the Areopagus, where they said to him, "May we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting? You are bringing some strange ideas to our ears, and we want to know what they mean." Paul stood up then at the meeting of the Areopagus and said, "Men of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. For as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, 'To an unknown God.' Now what you worship as something unknown, I am going to proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth, and does not live in temples built by hands. And he is not served by human hands as if he needed anything, because he himself gives all men life and breath and everything else. From one man he made every nation of men, that they should inhabit the whole earth, and he determined the time set for them and the exact places where they should live. God did this so that men would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being. And as some as your own poets have said, we are his offspring. Therefore, since we are God's offspring, we should not think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image made by man's design and skill. In the past, God overlooked such ignorance, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent. For he has set a day when he will judge the world with justice by the man he has appointed. He has given proof of this to all men by raising him from the dead." When they heard about the resurrection of the dead, some of them sneered, but others said, "We want to hear you again on this subject." And at that, Paul left the council. A few men became followers of Paul and believed. I was intrigued when I got to looking into this passage, and the opening part of this dialogue of the experience of Paul begins with this observation that Paul was greatly distressed to see that the city was full of idols. Did some word study on that word distressed. It is more than just, in the original Greek, it is more than just a feeling of frustration, but rather it should convey to us a deep emotional distress, akin, perhaps some have said, to inner rage, even a level of anger, that these things that Paul discovers here in Athens should exist. And sometimes I think when persons are full of distress at that level, Often their speech is very, very strong and very emotional, and often conveys the idea that I'm going to conquer the person who is opposed to what I believe. But here we find Paul, out of this deep distress over what he observes in the city of Athens, actually becomes incredibly articulate, respectful, even gentle with his message to those in the council. And he speaks to them intelligently, thoughtfully. He begins where they are. What he understands is their place of beginning. And he moves them then to a place of understanding of what it meant for Jesus to be among us, for God to be in his creative activity among us, and what it meant for Jesus to be raised from the dead. He doesn't give all the explanation, but he gives enough that some believed, both men and women, and decided to follow Paul and his other believers. Others said, "This is pretty intriguing. We've not heard this before, and we'd like to come back and hear some more." And then you had still others who sneered at what he was saying and thought it was not useful, and perhaps they would never come again. That kind of response, those three levels of response, are not untypical, and we should not be discouraged. And I trust that you and I have a deep passion for the truth of the gospel. But when we are interacting with our culture, we do so with what Peter said the method should be, that with gentleness and respect to share the hope that we have within. May the Lord bless you, and may your week end be wonderful.